The NFL draft is 5 days away, so it's the perfect time to take you through my latest mock draft on the Fantasy First Down. What's happening? I'm Ben Wasley. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. Make sure you check us out on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down, on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. Check out our website at ffdfantasyfootball.com, and on YouTube you can find us at the Fantasy First Down. We've just started our new YouTube page, so make sure you please go check out all the content on there. I also do a lot of articles on Rasball, and I'll be on walterfootball.com as well, where I get a lot of my information. So you make sure you go check them out as well. Today, I'm taking you through the latest of my mock drafts. There's been a lot of rumors and things that have come out in the last week or so. So I've put together a few updates. I want to take you through what to expect when the draft starts on Thursday night. As usual, we'll be going through it like this. If you've got any questions or comments, make sure you put them in the comments section. You know I answer all your questions. I've actually worked out how to answer the questions on Instagram this time as well. Thank you to those of you who commented last time. So we know where the draft's going to start. It's Caleb Williams. This has been locked in for weeks, if not months. He's always been the consensus number one prospect. There's a lot of question marks out there over his personality. I think they're overblown. I think he's going to be fantastic. How exactly he melds with the NFL, well, I mean, every prospect is a risk, but I think he's one of the safest prospects we've seen in years. Where it gets interesting is with the second pick. And Jayden Daniels had become the pretty heavy favorite with bookmakers. Most bookmakers had Daniels as their number one, gotten to the point where he was 65-75% chance of being the number two pick. However, Drake May has made a resurgence. They're now closer to even odds with most bookmakers these days, and that makes life very interesting. We really, truly don't know exactly what's going to happen, but there have been reports coming out that maybe Adam Peters, who's the GM and the deciding factor in Washington, is leaning towards Daniels. That's from Charlie Campbell. And I trust his judgment. I trust his sources. I think that's probably the most likely thing, though even he says it's still a little bit up in the air. So we will have to wait and see exactly what's going to happen, but you'd expect Jayden Daniels will be the pick here. If that happens, that's going to be really disappointing to the Patriots because most reports suggest that the Patriots prefer Jayden Daniels. Drake May is their probable next best option, though it could easily be JJ McCarthy as well. Most of the bookmakers are leaning towards May, and that makes perfect sense. Drake May is ultimately the better of these two prospects, in my opinion. He's got, I guess, Josh Allen upside, probably not with quite the same rushing ability, but he's got that same big build. He's got a strong arm, and likewise, he's pretty raw coming out of college. How exactly he melds with the NFL, we don't exactly know yet. I think it's probably going to take him a season or two to get himself together and get sorted and up to his potential. He's still on the young side as opposed to guys like Bo Nix and Michael Penix who've been in there for 5 or 6 years. Drake May's only been in college for a few years and he hasn't been starting the whole time. So we do have to see how exactly he's going to progress, but there's definitely upside there. And I think this is probably the pick. There have been some people talking about the Patriots trading down. I don't think that makes any sense. Robert Kraft is 82 years old. He needs to get winning. He needs to get winning soon. Last year was pretty embarrassing for him and his legacy post Bill Belichick. He's going to want to get winning quickly so that he can show that he actually had a big impact on all the success and it wasn't just Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. Now, if the top three picks go that way, we're expecting somebody to trade up for JJ McCarthy. It's looking more and more like that's going to be with the Arizona Cardinals. They've been making a lot of suggestions that they'd like to trade back, and there are a lot of reports suggesting they probably will. We don't know exactly who it's going to be with, but it's probably going to be with the Minnesota Vikings. They've got the most draft capital. They already traded up to take the 23rd pick from Houston. It makes sense they could bundle that with their 11th pick and trade up to number 4 to get JJ McCarthy. Arizona wants to move back. They want to keep getting more assets. They've been really clear in their conversations with the media that that's part of their plan. I think that's probably what's going to happen here. McCarthy, for me, is a bit of a reach at this stage, but when you've got a couple of QB-needy teams around, that does cause certain prospects to rise, especially when they're quarterbacks. I think McCarthy does at least have upside. He's a bit more of a system QB than I would expect from Minnesota, who has plenty of weapons that they can use. I would have expected they'd be better off going out and getting someone like a Russell Wilson or someone like a Kirk Cousins. It's kind of disappointing they're going to go down this route. I don't think McCarthy has the strong arm to really help Justin Jefferson out to the extent that we'd be hoping. This will probably hurt Justin Jefferson in fantasy and the other receivers, and probably to some extent TJ Hawkinson as well. But in the long term, my workout for the Vikings, I do think they're giving up a lot, though, to get a prospect who's not the same caliber of those top three guys. It's also possible that Arizona stays and picks here. If that's the case, we've had reports from Mike Jurecki, who's an excellent Cardinals reporter, that they actually prefer Malik Neighbors over Marvin Harrison Jr., which is really interesting because most people don't. That would mean we could see Neighbors go here and Harrison have a little bit of a fall depending on where the wide receivers go. We could also see Arizona trade back up into the top 10 and take Neighbors then, knowing that Harrison will probably go with the 5th pick, or maybe even with the 6th pick if Joe Alt goes to the Chargers. The Chargers, therefore, have the 5th pick, and it wouldn't surprise me either if they wanted to trade out. There have been a lot of rumors suggesting they'd like to trade out, but they've also said very clearly that they haven't been offered a package yet that they feel is worth their while. For that reason, at this stage, I've got them sticking at the 5th pick, and I think especially if the Cardinals trade out, it makes a lot more sense for the Chargers to stick and pick at the 5th. Harbaugh has been really clear about saying he sees this as the number 1 pick in the draft. This is where the draft starts. There's the 4 quarterbacks going off the board, and then you get all the other offensive weapons. And that means they can take their pick of Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Joe Alt, anyone else they want, ultimately. I think for most teams, Harrison's going to be the pick, but it is possible the Chargers trade down or just take the best clear tackle, which is Joe Alt. So this could be a really interesting pick to see what happens. I think this could surprise a few people. I think this is also a slot where the Cardinals could trade back from 11 up to 5 to grab their guy Neighbors. Not really sure if that makes sense if they expect the Chargers to take Harrison. Maybe they can trade with the Giants instead. We'll have to wait and see what happens. Pick number 6, the Giants. Now, there have been rumors about them wanting to trade up and get somebody. If Drake May falls to the 4th pick, which is possible, it wouldn't surprise me if they try to trade with the Cardinals. That way, the Cardinals only go down 2 picks and they can make sure they get one of the better receivers. Having said that, I don't think that's in the Giants' best interest. They're already paying Daniel Jones plenty of money this year. I think they're better off just waiting one more year and seeing what he has. And then they can wait until next year and take their pick of that crop if they decide that that's what they want to do. There's still some okay guys coming through like Drew Aller and guys like that. They're not quite going to be at the standard of the 4 or at least the top 3 in this class. But I think the Giants are going to have to pay so much to get up there. They're not going to be able to take advantage of that rookie contract that their rookie quarterback will get when they're already paying Daniel Jones so much money. Plus, they won't have any receivers for him to throw the ball to. They're much better off getting a receiver for Daniel Jones and giving him one last chance to show that he can play and can get through a season injury-free. Malik Neighbors is a fantastic prospect. He's got some question marks about his character. He can be a little bit arrogant, he doesn't love football to the same extent of the guys like Rome Odunze in particular, and to some extent Marvin Harrison, but he's an elite prospect. He's very quick. He's explosive. He can make plays from anywhere on the field. I do like what he would do for the Giants. He is the sort of weapon that they've needed, and they'll definitely need now that Saquon Barkley has moved on. They don't really have much else there as well. Darius Slayton cannot be the number 1 guy. With the 7th pick, I think the Titans would be stoked if Joe Alt falls to them at 7. He's the clear best tackle prospect on the board. This is a good offensive tackle class, but Joe Alt is by far the best. If he falls to them with the 7th pick, they will be over the moon. Now, he's not a perfect tackle prospect. We have seen better over the years. He's a little bit stiff. He's surprisingly tall for a tackle. But I do think that he is going to be exactly what they need to rebuild that O-line and give their rushing attack a chance to really succeed. They've obviously got Tony Pollard going over there now, which is a little bit weird. I'm not really sure how that's going to go with Tyjae Spears. But between the two of them, if the O-line is doing better, that will help them have more chance of succeeding in the run game with Peter Skoronski on the other side. Plus, it'll protect Will Levis and give him the best chance of succeeding in his second season. If Joe Alt goes to the Chargers at 5, this makes this pick very interesting. This could be the kind of area where we could see the Titans trading out. Someone might want to come up to get Brock Bowers or Rome Odunze. These 7th and 8th pick are exactly the sort of area where I'd be expecting to see a few trades. Now, the 8th pick, again, if Atlanta sticks and picks, I would expect that they'd want to take a defensive player. And while there's some good offensive players on the board, I don't think it makes sense for them to do that again. They already got Bijan, they got Kyle Pitts, they got Drake London, all in this early part of the first round. Now they've got Kirk Cousins. They've got the core of their offensive side. They're still lacking edge rush, and they should realistically have taken an edge rush in the last couple of years. Now's their chance to get it. Dallas Turner is the best defensive player available. He's the first defensive player I expect to be taken. He doesn't need to go here. I don't think that teams picking after them would necessarily take him. So they could trade back if they wanted to. There is some risk that Chicago would take Turner, but I think they're probably more likely to go with whichever of the pass catchers is left. For that reason, Atlanta might trade down with whoever trades back to 11 so that that team can trade back up and get the receiver or Brock Bowers that they want. It will be interesting to see how the Falcons go because this might be the last time they're picking in this area and they really do need to shore up that defense. There's also some rumors they might take a cornerback, but I think that's probably less likely than an edge rusher, given they at least have one good cornerback already in Terrell. Now, the 9th pick is an interesting one. I personally originally didn't have Chicago taking a pass catcher. I didn't think it really made sense. I thought they might take Jared Verse or Laiatu Latu here and really shore up that defense. They've already built a lot around Caleb Williams. They've got the weapons there. They've brought Keenan Allen in, but realistically, Keenan Allen is probably only a 1 or 2 year rental. That means they can bring in another receiver who can work with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen, progress them there, kind of like Jackson Smith-Njigba has in Seattle. It'll give him an opportunity to kind of ease his way in, not have to be the guy straight away, and then progress from there and become the number 1 receiver over time. I really like Rome. He's a talented receiver. He's big and strong, good at the contested catch. He's quick enough. He's a number 1 receiver. I think he's going to be very good. Maybe not quite as good as Harrison and Neighbors, but I think in most classes, he's probably the number 1 guy on the board. It just happens that this is a really strong quarterback and wide receiver class, and that's why he's fallen to this point. This would be a great pick for the Bears. I do hope they take a pass catcher, but I think it does make a little bit more sense for them to take an edge rusher if you're looking at the structure of their team. I just think it would be great to see Caleb Williams throwing to this guy. I think the combination of those two for years to come would be fantastic. Now, the 10th pick, if things fall this way, this would be fantastic for the Jets. We know the Jets love Brock Bowers. There's been so much talk about how much they like him. And pretty much every mock draft I see these days have Brock Bowers there. I've always mocked Brock Bowers to the Jets. It's just a perfect fit. It makes sense. They're very weak at their tight end position. Tylen Conklin is not the guy. Jeremy Ruckert is a number 2 blocker. I feel like they need a guy who can come in and be a pass catcher. Brock Bowers is a receiving weapon. He's nearly more of a slot receiver, a big slot receiver, than he is a tight end because he's not going to do a lot of blocking, but he's going to be that weapon that Aaron Rodgers needs. You add him to Garrett Wilson and to Mike Williams if he's healthy, and all of a sudden you've got a really good offense that's going to create a lot of space for Breece Hall to run into as well. This would make the Jets a true Super Bowl contender. If they go elsewhere and go with the O-line, I don't think that really makes sense. They brought in 2 starters for this year. They need to be thinking about trying to win this year before Aaron Rodgers retires, because at that point in time, they're going to have to do a total reset. They need to throw everything at this Super Bowl ring this year, and that means getting a guy who can be a weapon for them straight away, and that's Brock Bowers. The 11th pick is where things get interesting. I can see the Cardinals trading back in, as I've said, but it is possible they'll stick and pick. I know Charlie Campbell's talked about the possibility of them taking a defensive player here, and then they've still got 2 more picks later in the draft. That would be the 23rd pick they got for trading back, plus the 27th pick that they already had from last year. Now, Byron Murphy is a fantastic defensive rusher. I like the way he can push through the interior. He's got that Aaron Donald mold about him. He's not as good. No one's as good as Aaron Donald is, but he's at least in that mold, and he gives the Cardinals something they don't really have at the moment. They could also go for an edge rusher. They might like Latu. They might like Verse. But I've heard a lot of rumors about Murphy rising up boards. He's expected to go somewhere in the top 16. We know that Seattle likes him enough that they've said they'll take him if he's there, privately, of course. But I think he'll probably go earlier. I think this is his sort of region. I think somewhere around here or Denver makes sense as him being a pick. He might even go in the top 10. He's significantly better than the other tackles available in the class. And we do know that defensive tackles are players that are respected in the league a little bit more these days. They've been getting bigger contracts, and that means that you want to get your rookies for positions that are going to have a lot of contract issues later on. So Murphy here kind of makes sense, but there could be a lot of other things happening, especially if the Chargers trade back to this spot. You'd expect that they'd get an offensive tackle instead. That means Murphy would start to fall, and that'll make things very interesting for the next few picks as well. Now, pick number 12, I hate this pick. This pick makes no sense at all, and yet it's starting to sound like what the Broncos want to do. There has been a lot of talk that they also really love JJ McCarthy, which makes a little bit more sense. He's at least a good player. But there've also been talk that Sean Payton really likes Bo Nix. There's been talk that they want to trade up to get JJ McCarthy. I think that kind of makes sense. There's also been talk that they might stick here and pick Bo Nix. This would be significantly too early. I've been saying for weeks they need to be trading down until late in the first round and taking Nix there. They don't have a second round pick, which is usually the pick that they would be taking for Nix. He's not a first round prospect. So if they're going to take him in the first round, it needs to be late in the first round. They need to find a trade partner who's willing to come up and really push into this area. Who they're pushing for, though, in this area, I don't know. It might be a team who wants to jump the other offensive tackle needy teams and take an Olu Fashanu or someone like that here. It would also make sense if there's a team that really wants to get a wide receiver, that maybe they can move down a few picks. They can then move down a second time with a wide receiver needy team who might want to come up and take Brian Thomas. So you could see the Broncos coming back. There have been more rumors coming out recently of them potentially moving back. If they do stick and pick, we do expect that George Patton likes Liatu Latu. Latu is in this range. There have been a lot of teams that say they've cleared him medically. He has neck issues. He even temporarily retired in college before moving across to UCLA. This would be the perfect range for him. I prefer to see the Broncos take Latu here than take Bo Nix. I think they've got a lot of rebuilding to do. I think they need to do a total reset. They probably won't, but that's what I'd like to see them do. If they take Nix, they should be taking him later, but I have a feeling they could even just take him here because they're for some reason worried about some other team taking him. I don't think any other team would even consider him until the late first, early second round. Now, this is another team that desperately needs a quarterback in their mind. Now, personally, I think that Gardner Minshew's fine for now. They've also got Aiden O'Connell. They should see what they've got in those two and try to build a team that they can put a rookie into later on and have some success. They're picking from the 13 spot, so it's not like they've got the perfect spot to take a quarterback. They'll probably be in this same area next year as well, if not higher up. I would prefer to see them wait till next year. Even if they take one this year, Michael Penix seems to be the guy they're gunning for. They'll prefer Jaden Daniels, obviously, because of Antonio Pierce's links with Jaden Daniels. But assuming that's off the board, I think it makes sense for them to take a tackle here. They really need to work out that O-line and get a right tackle opposite Colton Miller. That means that they can then take Penix later on. So I would expect that they take a tackle here or possibly even a cornerback. We've heard about Quinion Mitchell as being an option. There have been reports to suggest it might be Quinion Mitchell or a tackle here, and then Michael Penix later on in the first round, with them trading up into the first round to make sure they get that 5-year contract. We saw that happen with the Ravens with Lamar Jackson quite a few years ago, where they took Hayden Hurst in the first round, insanely, and then decided to trade up and take Lamar Jackson with the 32nd pick, I believe it was. And then they actually drafted Mark Andrews and went double tight end later on. That seems to be the more logical way of doing things because Penix doesn't really belong in this range. I don't think there's another team that's really gunning for him. I think they can stay ahead of most teams by taking him late in the first round. This way, they also get him a tackle. And this would be his blindside offensive tackle as well, his blindside protector, because he's left-handed. The right tackle is the guy that needs to be really strong. So getting JC Latham, who is a perfect right tackle prospect, I think that makes sense. We have seen the Raiders make mistakes around using Alabama tackles before with Alex Leatherwood when they took him 17 overall, and most people thought he didn't belong in the first round. We knew that was coming, but we still thought it was insane, and unsurprisingly, he busted. So we'll see how Latham goes, but I think he's a significantly better prospect. I don't buy this idea that you can just write off all tackles from a school or all of one position from a school because a couple of them bust. It doesn't work like that. Latham's a good prospect. Now, we're going to get a bit of a tackle run going on here. I think we'll see a lot of O-linemen going in this range. There's a lot of O-linemen needy teams, and there's a lot of O-linemen that belong in this area of the draft. I think the Saints will probably go with Fashanu. Fashanu is even a good enough prospect to go in the top 10. Wouldn't surprise me if he goes 7th pick to the Titans. If he doesn't, there could be some teams who want to trade up into this range as well to try to get him. In my previous mock, I had the Bengals moving up to try to get one, and I even had the Saints jumping the Raiders to try to get Fashanu. The more I think about that, the more I think it doesn't really make sense for the Saints to jump the Raiders. The Raiders need a right tackle. The Saints are probably going to get a left tackle. So Fashanu makes sense to them. He does have the ability to play left tackle, unlike most of the other O-line prospects in this range. He's the only real true stud prospect that has left tackle as a reasonable outcome for him, at least in the near future. So I think Fashanu to the Saints makes the most sense. He's who they'd like to get, but I think there are other teams that will be hoping to jump into this space and take him instead. With the 15th pick, this is where we start to hit a few cornerbacks. We could see cornerback earlier. We could see the Raiders, for example, take a cornerback. It's also possible even that the Cardinals take a cornerback with that 11th pick. Cornerback is one of those positions we know the Cardinals want to hit with what could potentially be 3 picks in the first round. They'd love to get a defensive lineman. They'd love to get a cornerback, and they want to get a wide receiver. What order they get them in will probably just depend on how the board falls. So it will be interesting to see which cornerback goes first and which team is the first one to jump in and take one. The Colts are a team that I really like the idea of them taking a cornerback. They need someone else there. Juju Brents looked okay. I'm not convinced by Dallas Flowers. They've got Kenny Moore there. He's a great nickel corner, but they need someone on the outside. And I think Terrion Arnold is becoming the likely first cornerback off the board. There have been a lot of questions about whether Quinion Mitchell has the quality of play against good opposition to show that he can actually get it done in the NFL. Arnold's not as quick as Mitchell, as Cooper DeJean, as Nate Wiggins, but he's reads the game really, really well. He's instinctive. He's got good ball skills. He can still stay with players. He's quick enough. I think that he's going to be a perfect NFL corner. I think he's going to be fantastic for the Colts. He's exactly what they need as an outside option. I also think that they would be a team who would be in the Brock Bowers sweepstakes if somehow he doesn't go to the Jets. I'm expecting Bowers to go on the first 10 picks. If he doesn't, I'd be expecting teams like the Broncos and Colts to be trying to move up and take him. It's also not out of the question that the Colts go wide receiver. You can see at the top, I've got the odds based on DraftKings of their likelihood of taking a certain position. A lot of people have been saying wide receiver, but they've already got Michael Pittman. They're not really a pass-heavy team. Anthony Richardson can run the ball enough that they don't need to pass the ball to a heap of receivers. So I think probably what they've got already is fine. They've got their small slot guy, plus they've also got Alex Pierce. I feel like that's okay. They don't desperately need another receiver, but we could see them go Brian Thomas here. I feel like this is the range where he might come off the board, even though I expect him later on. Number 16, we've got another tackle. The Seahawks really have 2 options. They can go O-line or D-line. Both of them are a little bit weak. They went O-line quite a lot recently, but they need to do more. They really need to rebuild that line. Charles Cross was the only one there that played particularly well last year. He's a former first-round pick. They need someone opposite here. I think Talise Fuanga makes sense to them. He can play right tackle, though he's probably a little bit more of a guard. It wouldn't surprise me if he starts a guard and then slides out to tackle later on after he's got a little bit more experience. But regardless, they need to take one of the tackle options. I've also had Troy Fautani out to them. I can't pronounce his name. I don't know why. It's one of the simpler names, but there's so many F names I get mixed up. So Troy Fautani is from Washington, whose head coach has become the OC for the Seahawks. So there is kind of that connections there. For that reason, a lot of people have been connecting Michael Penix and Furtado to the Seahawks. I'm not sure that makes sense. The fact that you coached someone before doesn't necessarily mean you want to bring them in. You might know their weaknesses and they're actually not good enough for that spot. So it's possible they bring Furtado in simply for that familiarity, but I think they're more likely to go for the consensus better pick based on their scouting and their opinions. Fuanga makes sense here. In fact, the bookmakers have him as the likely second O-lineman off the board. I think that's less likely. I think it's going to be Latham and Fashanu before him. But Fuanga's certainly in that area. We've had a lot of reports that suggest the O-lineman can go in any order after Joe Alt. So it is possible we see someone else here instead. Now, 17th pick, things get a little bit interesting as well. The Jaguars are in another area where I could see them trading in any direction. They might trade up for somebody. They might trade down with a team that wants to get a wide receiver. This is that wide receiver zone. They might trade down to let an O-line needy team get in there. There's a lot of options they have. There has been a surprising amount of talk suggesting they want a wide receiver. That makes no sense to me. They just got Gabe Davis in. They've already got Christian Kirk, who's perfectly good. Zay Jones is perfectly good as well. They've got Evan Ingram. They've got a heap of options. Plus, they've got Etienne, who can catch balls out of the backfield. Why do they need another wide receiver? It doesn't make sense to me. Their secondary is really weak. They need to stock up. I think it makes sense for them to take one here. For me, that makes the most sense in the world. I would expect them to take a cornerback here. Quinion Mitchell is probably the best guy on the board. Cooper DeJean has been rising. I'll talk about him later on, but Mitchell is extremely athletic, plus he's got a lot of upside. Arnold is a little bit better polished, as I talked about earlier. There are concerns about Mitchell. While the scouts like him, the coaches don't like him quite as much, and there are concerns about whether the fact he played with a slightly weaker team and therefore played against weaker opposition a lot of the time means we don't know whether he'd be able to cope with the ability of NFL receivers. I'm not sure that I agree with that. I think Mitchell's going to be fine, but I do still prefer Arnold as well. I think it makes sense for Mitchell to go off the board second. He's a really good prospect as well. Now, back to another O-lineman, the guy who I can't pronounce the name of, Troy Fautanu. Now, the Bengals need to go O-line. That O-line is trash. They have brought Trent Brown in as a short-term fix, but he can't stay healthy. He's 31 or something like that. He's getting to the point where he's going to move on. I say 31 as if that's ancient. I'm well past 31. But regardless, Trent Brown is going to be moving on soon. They need to be blooding somebody. They can bring in Fautanu. They can shift him onto the inside for a season or two. Then they can shift him to tackle when they're ready. I think this fit makes sense. A lot of people are mocking Byron Murphy here. I don't really understand that. I don't think that's a major need for the Bengals. Plus, I think he'll probably be off the board by this point in time. But Murphy is someone that we could see potentially, according to a lot of people who know what they're talking about. I think they're more likely to go O-line, so do the bookmakers. 19th pick, it's Latu. He could go anywhere. He's one of those parabolic players I talk about where their range is really long. They can go on one end because he's actually a really talented player and maybe the best edge rusher in the class, or he could go on the other end because of massive injury risk. He could fall to the second round potentially because of neck injuries he's had in college, which saw him temporarily retire. He has been injury cleared, we believe, by most teams. There have been a lot of reports suggesting that most team doctors have cleared him. For that reason, I expect he'll at least go in the top 20. I think he might fall ahead of Jared Verse. Verse is a little bit more of a polished prospect. Latu's got some upside. He's an explosive rusher. I like what he's going to be able to do. Not the greatest tackler, but good enough. Very good pass rusher. That's exactly what the Rams need. They've just lost Aaron Donald. Byron Young broke out last year. He was great as a rookie. I think they need someone else opposite to him because Michael Hoyt was not good enough. He shouldn't even be on the outside. He's an interior guy. So I think bringing Latu in makes sense if they can't get the interior guy they want. I think they'd love to get Byron Murphy. I don't think it makes sense for them to trade up, but it is possible. Or we could see them take Johnny Newton here or one of the other tackle options as well. I'd love to see them go with Latu, though. I think they could coach him up. I think that would be a good combination. I also think cornerback is within the range of possibility as well. Now, there's a lot of people linking the Steelers to Graham Barton. In fact, he's a favorite to go here. They're probably going to go O-line. It makes sense. They don't have a center at the moment. They just let Mason Cole go, and rightly so. Their O-line used to be their pride and joy. They used to be able to get fantastic pass rushers like your Le'Veon Bells who could wait for plays to develop because the O-line was so strong. It had also allowed them to protect players. Now they've got a quarterback who holds the ball longer than everybody else in Russell Wilson. They need someone that can protect him until he's able to throw the ball. Plus, they need to get that run game going because Najee Harris and Jalen Warren are very good players, but they're going to need blocking for them to truly succeed instead of having a whole heap of passing plays for them to get them out in space. For that reason, I like the odds of them getting a center guard prospect. I think that's where the main weakness is. Graham Barton can play center. He's probably more of a guard. He's played tackle as well. That flexibility is really useful, but I think he could come in and play center if necessary or shift to guard and they can move other things around. I had Jackson Powers-Johnson here previously. He's more of a true center prospect, but there's a lot of talk about the fact that the Steelers love Barton. They have a tendency in the first round to draft players that they brought in for their 30 visits. For that reason, I think that Barton makes sense. They've brought him in for 2 visits now in total, including the 30. I think that he's probably a better fit as well. There's a lot of talk that he's a rising prospect in this draft. A lot of people weren't even mocking him in the first round originally. Now we're thinking top 20. Now, this is another player that's been rising as well. The bookmakers have him as nearly certain to go in the first round, even though that didn't look like the case a while ago. There's been a lot of positive reports out of his meetings with people. He's extremely explosive. He gives a replacement for Christian Wilkins in Miami. It's Johnny Newton, or Jershawn Newton is his other name, depending on who's talking about him. Miami are favourites to go O-line, but I think that this is the perfect fit for them. They also like Laiatu Latu. They've met with him a lot, but I think they're picking a little bit too late to get him. For that reason, it makes sense for them to replace their interior disruptor with another one, with a guy who can basically take over from Christian Wilkins and do the exact same thing. I know that protecting Tua is really important. He has had a lot of injuries, and I think it makes sense to get the right protection for him. I'm not sure that in this space they're going to find that right player. They might go with Amarius Mims. He's kind of falling into this range, but there's a lot of concerns about him after his pro day. He didn't weigh in. There's some character issues. It was a little bit immature. I'm not sure that he really makes sense here. I'd much rather see Miami go with a defensive player and shore up that side of things because their offense was already really good last year. They were scoring a lot of points. It was their defense that was the weakness. Now, speaking of defensive players, Philly has a lot of options. They could go cornerback. They could go D-line. They could also go O-line. Of course, they've just lost Jason Kelce, and they do tend to think a couple of years down the line, which means that trying to replace Lane Johnson, guys like that, later on makes sense as well. It wouldn't shock me at all if we see Philly go with O-line, but I have them going to Cooper DeJean. He's a very athletic player. He was fantastic at his pro day. He's coming back from a serious foot injury and blew up his pro day. He looked fantastic. He's a high character guy. Excuse me. High character guy. Teams love that. He's got positional flexibility as well. He can play safety. He can play as a box safety even. He can play as a nickel corner. He can play as a corner on the outside as well. I think that fact will really help Philly, who've had plenty of players in like that in the past, but they're lacking at the moment. Losing guys like CJ Gardner-Johnson and things like that has really hurt them. They're trying to rely on James Bradbury and Darius Slay, and it's just not working. Their D-line is fantastic. They've got so many good D-linemen, and yet their secondary is just not doing the job and not tracking their players well enough. They need to improve the secondary. They've brought in guys like Eli Ritz and Kelly Ringo in the past. They're just not good enough. They're not starters. They're just rotational guys and special teamers. They need a guy who can, from day one, get things done. Cooper DeJean is that guy. And as an added bonus, he's a pretty good returner as well. So I think he'd be perfect here. It wouldn't even surprise me if he goes earlier, in which case we could see the Eagles take someone like a Nate Wiggins or something like that. Now, this is the Cardinals. This is the pick they got from Minnesota when Minnesota moved up to the 4th spot. Someone's going to have this pick. We have no idea who. I think Cardinals are most likely at this point, but it could be any number of 4 or 5 or even 6 teams. Now, of course, we had them being most likely to pick a receiver. That's why the odds at the top talk about their odds of picking at the 4th pick. Obviously, this is now the 23rd pick. They're not going to be getting guys like Harrison and McCarthy, but it does give you an idea of the kind of guys that we can expect them to take. We expect them to take wide receivers, we expect them to take D linemen, and we expect them to take quarterbacks. They're the three positions that we've heard that they're targeting. I've heard that report from a couple of different people, especially Charlie Campbell, who nails his reports most of the time. So I expect that to be the case. If that's the case, I think it makes sense to go wide receiver here. No one's taken Brian Thomas yet. I think in the actual draft, it wouldn't surprise me if someone jumps past this position to 2021 roughly to take Thomas, because he is the clear fourth best receiver in this class. He's very explosive. There's a lot of talent there, but there are concerns, especially about his hands. He has a lot of drops. Plus, he's a little bit lazy with his route running. So there are a few issues that need to be ironed out, but I feel like the Cardinals can afford to do that. They need a number one receiver. They don't have one at the moment. I feel like Thomas is explosive enough to be that guy. He definitely has the upside to take over and let Michael Wilson be what he should be, which is a number two receiver. Regardless, they need to help Kyler Murray. 24th pick. Now, we should see the Cowboys going with an O-lineman. But with Jerry Jones, you just don't know. He does some weird stuff. To be fair, his weird stuff often works out, like when he randomly took Micah Parsons, even though that was a position of strength previously. So it could be that he sees somebody fall and decides that that's the pick he needs to take. In this case, that would be Jared Verse. Jared Verse is falling in this mock. I just can't work out who would take him. He'll probably go earlier than this. So if someone like that falls, the Cowboys are the kind of team that would take against a need. But if they go with need, they need an O-lineman. I think Tyler Guyton's a good fit. There's been a lot of talk matching the Cowboys with Guyton. Of the mocks they looked at, a number of teams had Guyton going there. They also really like Jordan Morgan, though I think this is a little bit too early for him. I think if they get Morgan, it'll probably be by trading back with someone. That's always in their wheelhouse as well. Wide receiver wouldn't be crazy. They don't really have a true wide receiver too. I'm not buying that Brandon Cooks is going to be going around for too much longer, and Michael Gallup is bleh. So they do need a receiver at some point in time as well. They could take a receiver here, but really they need to get that O-line going again. They don't really have a running back, so they're probably going to get a rookie in. They need to give him every chance they can. Plus, Dak Prescott is a really good passer of the ball, but you need to give him protection and stop him getting injured, because he gets injured every second season, and then the Cowboys suck. 25th pick, this is where Amarius Mims stops his slide. He's a guy that I've had in the top 20 previously, but I'm just a little bit concerned about a lot of the reports coming out about the injury history, about his character. He's pretty immature. I'm not saying he's a bad guy. He's not one of these players where you're like, oh, this guy's a real piece of work. That's going to be a problem for our organization. It's more that he's just young and immature. Georgia's not really known for high character prospects, so I feel like there are always going to be their concerns around their players. I don't think Mims is one of the worst, but weight's a bit of an issue as well. He's very raw, but he has massive upside. He's got that prototypical big, wide, long arm build that you love from a left tackle. So unlike a lot of the O-line prospects in this class, I could see them sliding him in at tackle. I think that would be a fantastic spot for them. We do know that the Packers do love to go for athletic freaks. I don't know that he's really an athletic freak, but he's certainly a build freak in that he's massive. He looks exactly like what you would make a left tackle if you built them in a lab. I do like that about him. I'm a little bit concerned about the injuries, though. I feel like they would like to get a guy like a Graham Barton, preferably. I wouldn't be surprised if they even go like a Jackson Powers-Johnson. But Mims would be a good option here. He is falling in this draft. They do have other options. I think Cooper DeJean's a good fit. Nate Wiggins is also a good fit. Both very athletic guys, and they could use a cornerback. Now, this is where Jared Verse's fall finally ends. I'd be very surprised if Verse makes it to this point in time. I think this pick could end up being Chop Robinson. Chop Robinson's like the clear fourth edge rusher here, and we know that the Bucs like him. They've brought him in as well. So I would expect that we see the Buccaneers take an edge rusher. I know that there are a lot of talk about them possibly taking a cornerback or an O-lineman. I think edge rush makes a lot of sense. They need to replace Shaq Barrett. He's been fantastic for years, but he's getting on now. Again, I keep saying players that are like 31 or 32 are getting on, even though they're way younger than I am. But you know what I mean. As an NFL player who needs explosiveness, he's not going to be able to do that anymore. Jared Verse is a good all-round option. He's a good edge rusher. He can win with power. He can win with speed to a good enough extent. He's a good run defender. He's not great in coverage, but he's fine. He can play every down, which I think is the total opposite of Chop Robinson, which makes it an interesting situation. It wouldn't surprise me if Tampa decide they do want to push up to try to get a guy as well. But they don't really need to. It's kind of a little bit surprising they're in a win now window, given they've had Baker Mayfield at quarterback. But a lot of their players are aging. Mike Evans is getting older. Chris Godwin's getting older. A lot of the defensive players are getting older, especially their secondary and their rushers. For that reason, they need to get players who can perform straight away. I think Verse is a player who can come in and immediately make a positive impact. Now, this is where Nate Wiggins falls to. This is pretty late for him. There have been a lot of mocks where he's previously gone in that like 13 to the Raiders, 15 to the Colts, 17 to the Jaguars. Have been spots where I've seen him. I think he's going to go a lot later. There have been a lot of teams that are a little bit concerned about him. He's very, very skinny, 180-odd pounds. That's not big for an NFL player. That's not big for a human, realistically. That's probably below the average weight of an American male. Maybe that's saying a lot more about American males, but that's not particularly big for a guy that's quite muscly. He needs to put on a little bit more weight to stay healthy because he's going to get smashed by some of these tight ends in particular. He's not a very good tackler. He's a fantastic cover corner. He's very, very, very quick. He blew up the combine with his speed, but I'm very concerned about his ability to actually tackle. If the Cardinals can use him in a way that he's purely working in coverage and not having to work too much as a run stopper, that would be fantastic. But because he's limited in that way, I feel like that's going to see him fall a little bit towards the end of the first round. It does make sense for the Cardinals to take a cornerback. They do need to strengthen their secondary in addition to getting D linemen and wide receivers. Now, the 28th pick, I would be surprised if the Bills pick at 28. I expect they'll probably decide to trade up to make sure that they get the wide receiver they want. I think it would be fantastic if they can get Brian Thomas. They do need a number one receiver. They don't have Stephon Diggs. They don't have Gabe Davis. Khalil Shakir is not big enough to be a number one receiver. They don't really have anything behind him. I know they've got Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox, so they can play with a lot of sets that only use two wide receivers, but they still need a number one guy to replace Diggs. I think Adonai Mitchell kind of fits that bill. He's bigger than he looks. He's very quick. He's a great athlete, smooth hips, good route runner. There are some concerns there. There's some medical issues. There's question marks about his character, but he's still a first-round option. I could see them going for other guys as well. I think Xavier Worthy is possible, but that would be a mistake. I'd love to see them go Xavier Legette here. I also think Ladd McConkey is possible, but again, he's one of those smaller guys, and unless they want to make that how their team is, I don't think it really makes sense to go him here. I think Adonai Mitchell or Brian Thomas will be the two best options for them, and if they can't get those guys, I'm hoping they go for someone like Legette. Now, 29th pick is the Lions, and they're always a little bit tough to pick because they're going to go so strongly based on character and work ethic and things like that, and what can bring the correct character to their team. I think that's a fantastic way of drafting, but does make them a little bit difficult to pick. There have been a lot of talk about Darius Robinson moving into the first round. He was considered more of a second-round prospect, but it's pretty much considered highly likely, not a certainty, but highly likely that it'll end up in the first round now. For that reason, it's just a case of working out who's going to pick him. The Cardinals seem to like him, but if they take Byron Murphy early, it doesn't make sense for them to take another interior rusher later on. There'll also likely be a lot of edge rushers going off just before this. Robinson can more play inside. He's a bit more of a bigger player, more of like a 3-4 edge. I think that's probably a better fit for him. He can work off the edge, but more with power than with speed. He's a good run stopper. I think it makes sense for the Lions to take him. They've always had strong players through there. They've had Romeo Okwara retire due to injuries. I feel like he can take over that sort of role. They've got good, true defensive tackles and nose tackles, but they don't have guys just to play outside them. And they need something other than Aiden Hutchinson on the edge or near the edge so that they can get a little bit more pressure on opposing quarterbacks. They are in a position where they're pretty close to being able to challenge for a Super Bowl. So I think it makes sense for them to take immediate impact weapons. Quarterback is another position that we could see. Someone like a Kool-Aid McKinstry gets mocked here quite a lot. Both of these players have been linked to Detroit by reports. So it is worthwhile keeping in mind that guys like McKinstry, guys like Robinson do make sense for the Lions. The Lions are also a team that I could really see trading out with Las Vegas, who will then come in and obviously take Michael Penix. This is that sort of region. So I wouldn't be surprised if we don't even see Detroit picking on day one. Another team who always seems to be able to find value is Baltimore. They're statistically the best picking team in the NFL draft, just overall. And even on day one, even though they have weird misses like Hayden Hurst that I talked about previously, more often than not, they get it right because they don't take players based on need. They take players based on what makes sense based on value at that point in the draft. They just basically take the best player that's available every single year. At this stage, I think that's probably Chop Robinson in this mock, but it could be anyone. They do need an O-lineman, so they could take a Jackson Powers-Johnson. He's fallen in this mock as well. But I feel like Chop Robinson needs to go somewhere. He's clearly a first-round prospect. This is nearly shoehorning him in, using the fact that the Ravens are going to have to take a player who's the best player available. I feel like that's Chop Robinson here. Chop Robinson has a truly explosive first step, but that didn't really come across in college. He hasn't really got the moves to go with it yet, and he's going to need to beat NFL edge players and NFL defenders. I feel like he's not going to be able to do that initially. He's more of a rotational guy who can explode off the edge, but he's going to need a lot of coaching. The Ravens are very good at doing that sort of thing, and they do need edge rushers. I don't think Owe and those guys are going to be enough. David Ajabo hasn't really come about yet as he's returned from that injury he unfortunately got. I think that Chop Robinson would make sense here, but I could also see them taking an O-lineman. And they're another team I could also see trading back with, for example, the Raiders to get Michael Penix, or even with another team like the Giants if they want to come up and get a Bo Nix or Michael Penix. Now, the 49ers have a surprising amount of needs for a team that just slightly lost the Super Bowl. And their needs could increase if they trade away Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel. And there's been talk of that. Brandon Ayuk has taken the 49ers off a lot of his social media accounts. He's clearly looking for more money or seeking a trade. He has said that he's not seeking a trade, but we don't know what's going on behind the scenes there. So things get very interesting there. The 49ers do tend to go O-line or D-line quite a lot, especially D-line. They like to have a lot of edge rushes. So this is another area where you could see a Chop Robinson or a Darius Robinson or even a Latu or Verse here. I wouldn't be surprised if the 49ers go in that direction. Wide receiver is a high probability option according to the bookmakers. I don't know that they're really going to go wide receiver here. It wouldn't surprise me if they wait until the second round. But if they do, I can imagine them going Xavier Worthy and adding a little bit more speed, being that speed guy. They already have a lot of speed and skill underneath with Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey. I think adding Xavier Worthy would be really interesting. But they do typically use their third wide receiver, in this case, Juwan Jennings, as a blocker quite a lot of the time. That's not Xavier Worthy. He's not even slightly a blocker. So they're only really bringing in a lot of these wide receiver guys if they're going to lose either Deebo or Brandon Ayuk. I think it makes most sense for them to go O-line, so that's why I've given them Jackson Powers-Johnson. I think this is too late for him. He deserves to go earlier. He's a really good interior blocker. I personally like him better than Graham Barton. I think he deserves to go higher, but there has been a lot of talk that Barton is the preferred prospect by a lot of teams. So we'll see what happens, but there's a lot of question marks over this pick, and this is another area where we could see them trading back for teams wanting to come up and get a quarterback. Now, my Chiefs, we're going to pick a wide receiver, or maybe we're not. I mean, who knows? We always say the Chiefs are going to pick a wide receiver in the first round, and we never do. I don't want to get Xavier Worthy here. I know that people are going to say, Xavier Worthy, he's the new Tyreek Hill. He's nothing like Tyreek Hill. He's not that same sort of player. I know he's small, and I know he's extremely fast, but he's a different sort of fast. He's like a good deep threat. He's a great route runner, but I do have concerns about him. I just don't know that he's got quite the size skill profile that really makes sense to be going in the first round. I think there's better players here. I think this is also a really deep wide receiver class. I don't think it really makes sense for the Chiefs to take a wide receiver here. I know it's the favorite option, and for that reason, I think it might happen, but it's really hard to know exactly what to expect. Worthy deserves to be in the first round, which is why I've got him in here. But I think if any O-lineman fall at all, it'll be going to the Chiefs. I think Jordan Morgan is someone who I haven't mocked into the first round. He's someone that could go in the first round. Kingsley Suamataia is another guy that could possibly go in the first round. I can say Suamataia. I can't say Furtado. Don't know why. So Suamataia could go here. I've seen him mocked to the Chiefs a lot in the first and the second round, oddly. So I think O-line also makes sense. They need to improve their tackle spots. Jawan Taylor just wasn't good enough. Protecting Patrick Mahomes needs to be the number one priority. Everything else is secondary to that. At some point, we're going to need to replace Travis Kelce. For that reason, if we're going to get a receiver, I prefer a slightly bigger guy. I prefer a Xavier Legette. I know he's not quite as big as people expected. He actually measured in at about 6'1", even though he has been reported as 6'3" throughout college, but he plays really big. He's got a big wingspan. I'd much rather see him coming in here and taking that contested catches over the top position rather than Xavier Worthy. He's going to take the top off, but he's not going to offer much else. And at the moment, with Rashee Rice a big question mark and Marquise Brown being a bit, I don't know. I don't really know that it makes sense adding in Worthy at this point. If anything, I'd be happy to see a tackle here. I think it makes perfect sense. There are some other guys that could easily make it into the first round as well. A lot of people have been talking about Ladd McConkey as a guy who could go into the first round. There's certainly reasonably high odds on him. Michael Penix is obviously someone we've talked about trading up as well. There's quite a few players who are in this range who could go here. Xavier Legette is someone I hope goes in the first round, but odds have him around that 40 range. Wouldn't surprise me if he goes to Carolina. There's also some quarterback options like Mike Sainristil and Ennis Rakestraw, who I could imagine going right at the end of the first round. Or we could see some other tackle options. I think Morgan makes sense. There's some defensive tackles who could find their way in. Guys like Fisk, I think, is possible, but they don't really fit in that first round mold. They're just kind of there because there's not any better options at the moment. That's all we got. That is the NFL mock draft number 3. Thank you for joining me again. It has been great to go through another mock draft. Obviously, the NFL draft is on Thursday night. I'm looking forward to it. I will be tweeting out some stuff as it goes through, giving my thoughts on the picks. I'm also going on the Walter Football podcast the day before, so you can check out the Walter Football YouTube channel. I'll be on there. Of course, make sure you sign up to all of our social media stuff. You can find us on Instagram at The Fantasy First Down, on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. Our website is ffdfantasyfootball.com. That's got this mock draft on it, and I'll be putting updated rankings on it as soon as the draft is done. I've had time to do the research. And on YouTube at The Fantasy First Down, putting a lot more stuff on our YouTube channel now that we've got that up and running. As always, make sure you leave your questions and thoughts in the comments, or just hit me up on Twitter or Instagram. You know I answer all of your questions there. Thank you very much for watching. Have an awesome weekend.